Hi there, everybody, and welcome to today's Art of Procurement podcast. I'm Philip Heitzen, the founder and managing director of Art of Procurement. And today's podcast is part of a special 2-week series. It's our second annual sponsored Startup and Growth series, where we aim to shine a light on the early stage and growth companies who are changing the way that leading procurement teams are driving outcomes that truly align with corporate objectives. We'll ask an entrepreneur from 7 different companies questions about what gap in the market their solution addresses, how they differentiate, and what their tools look like in action. It's a great way for you to get to know those who are leading the way. And in today's episode, I speak with Anders Lillevik of Focal Point. And so I started by asking Anders to introduce himself and to introduce Focal Point.
So Focal Point is a B2B SaaS solution in the procurement space, obviously, since I'm on this interview today. But Focal Point is a collaboration tool that allows procurement users and stakeholders to collaborate to initiate, track, and measure projects. Anything from a contract renewal through to a RFP. Users can request a project, procurement can then assign it to the right resource, who can then go through a variety of different data sources to figure out exactly what he or she needs to do. And then the project gets tracked from beginning to end, including savings measurement as well as client satisfaction.
So if you're basically kind of going through the full cycle of from initiation to project completion and kind of reporting on the end side of it, how would somebody initiate a project? Is there a user would go in, they would complete a form that comes to a triage desk, or it comes to, however you manage that as a procurement team, that allocate that project, and then the project manager or the sourcing manager or whoever it is then kind of takes ownership and runs with it through the tool?
Correct. So outside external procurement users, so procurement customers, can fill out forms online. And these forms are dynamically updated depending on the category that you select and the division you're in or department you're in. And that can then be routed for approval. And once approved, will then be sent to the right queue. So for instance, if you have a indirect procurement director in Asia, then a user from there, the one indirect procurement stuff would be routed to that particular person. Then the indirect procurement manager in Asia can then see who on his or her team have availability and expertise in that particular area and assign it to that person.
Right.
Then that person can take artifacts that are available to him or her. For instance, contracts in that particular category, spend in that particular category, vendors in that particular category, look at all the relevant artifacts, attach it to the project, plan it, and track it from there.
Now, your experiences as a former procurement executive, a CPO, what was your inspiration behind creating Focal Point? Like, why did you feel there was kind of a gap in the market for you as a practitioner, that something like this doesn't exist today, or the alternatives that do exist weren't giving you what you needed, so that you were so compelled to want to go and create this?
Sure. So I would, as a CPO for large and complex organizations, there were still a whole bunch of tasks that were done on Excel spreadsheet, PowerPoints, email, and so on. And the root cause, I believe, is the fact that the data is completely disparate, which then makes the process very difficult to execute. So for instance, if you want to create a category strategy, you need a whole bunch of data that you already have within the procurement system universe, but it's very hard to get to in a way that does not involve Excel spreadsheets. So for instance, for a category plan, you need to know your spend, your suppliers, your contracts, your stakeholders, just for starters. And even if you have an integrated suite today, so-called integrated suite, you need to go into each individual module, export the output from those modules, and then consolidate it in an Excel spreadsheet. So that made it very hard to do things like category management, project planning, project tracking, and so on. And when project tracking and benefits tracking was a standalone thing, that's all we basically did. So it was project X saving Y, and it was inefficient. So I decided to create a solution that takes all the relevant data sources, migrate them into one spot, and then put workflow underneath it to do things like project tracking, which is the first module we are launching. There are multiple modules coming that are going to benefit directly from having the data all in one spot. But that is really the inspiration behind it, is that even though you have a suite, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's integrated. And if you
Yeah.
are, heavens forbid, trying to do a best in breed solution, then you're even worse off. Then you have to log into actual separate systems to get the data. So focal point, as the name would suggest, is a focal point for all the data to come together with a workflow engine that you can do whatever tasks procurement needs to do.
So it would basically sit atop whether it's best of breed, whether it's a suite, whatever the existing tech stack that you have. It can grab the data from that using APIs into Focal Point, so that it can be the single place to go. You don't need to go into all these different tools and systems to grab all the information that you need that's relevant to that sourcing project or to creating that category strategy or category plan.
That's absolutely correct.
You talked about kind of collaboration being a key part of Focal Point. One of the questions I was interested in is kind of from a transparency perspective. As somebody comes in and they submit a project, let's say, or they have a need that they need to buy something, so they're opening up a project and they're a business user, a stakeholder. How much visibility did they then get into the project as you're going through the beginning to the end? Is it still kind of within procurement, and the procurement person is going to go and report out on a regular basis like they typically do? Or is the stakeholder going to be able to see kind of for themselves where something is, what's going on, and just making it a lot more of a transparent process for them?
Yeah, so the the business users have visibility into everything that pertains to them.
Mm-hmm.
So they will be able to see the spend that they are sort of responsible for. They'll be able to see the contracts that they're responsible for, the categories and suppliers they're responsible for, but also obviously projects. So they get to see where in the pipeline the project is. They get to see the notes and attachments that are being added to the projects.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the end of it, they get to sign off on benefits and sign off on client satisfaction through an NPS score. I mean, all of these things are configurable. You don't have to make approvals. Right. You don't have to do those things, but it's available to you should you want it.
Yeah. And from a best-in-class perspective, is that what you recommend, when you think about your experience, again, as a CPO, and how do you encourage kind of engagement into the procurement and sourcing process from stakeholders? Is that transparency a big part of that?
Yeah, I mean, you have to make it easy, right? So it's 2021 now, and at the end of the day, if you send it to them in an email with an attachment, they'll probably never open it. And if you ask them to log into a system and do 5 different things, they probably won't. Mm-hmm. So if you click on the portal, you get to see your dashboard with all of your projects and pipeline spend and so on. You have to make it easy. So transparency is one thing, right? Having access to the information is one thing, but being able to view it in an easy way is something completely different. And that's what we're striving to do, to create a one-stop shop that is easy for folks to sort of recognize what's pertinent to them. Also, for instance, the other thing we want to do, or we are doing, is as you are doing big projects that involve contracts, for instance, legal can then see which projects are coming down the pipeline and when they're likely to hit their desk, so they can actually plan for that. Mm-hmm. And that's also pretty cool as you're now thinking about all the other stakeholders that procurement interacts with, whether it's security, InfoSec, legal, etc. Right? So it really is meant to create that, open up that black box of procurement that we hear so much about sometimes.
Yeah, that resource planning is really interesting, because oftentimes people don't find that until something hits their queue, as opposed to looking at what's coming ahead because they can see what procurement is working on. I wanted to ask about implementation. I think one of the things that we struggle with in procurement is long implementation lead times and long time to value in terms of investments in technology. If somebody is going to make a decision today to implement Focal Point, what does that implementation look like?
So typically, when we do a pilot, we grab flat files from the users. So we get users on a flat file. We get spend data, contract data, and supplier data on flat files. We load it and normalize it. Immediately, they can use the system. Even if they have legacy projects, we can load them too, so that it becomes manageable from day one. And while we work on the APIs, the system is 100% functional. And we can even refresh the data manually until the APIs are up and running.
Right.
For the clients that we've had, they're large global clients. We've gone live somewhere between 2 to 3 weeks And usually it's either the access to the data or quality of the data that holds us up in terms of getting going live.
What does a pilot typically look like? Are you looking at it from a specific category or perhaps a specific geographic area? How would you encourage folks to think about how they may frame up a pilot if focal point is something they're interested in?
Well, I think the first thing you want to do is look at your process overall to say, all right, what does the process look like today and how can I make it simpler? Right. So we would tend to engage with them to say, look, you probably don't need 46 steps in your procurement process. Let's try to break it into the high level where users would actually say, all right, it's going from planning to execution to market activity and through to completion. And then we would then say, what data do you have and what do you need? So we have gone live in a pilot global full scope with 250 projects. And it doesn't take any longer for us to do that than it does for us to do 10 projects or, loading the data is loading the data, right? But I think from a pilot perspective, you want to make sure it's valuable to the organizations that's doing the pilot, right? So what are the pain points that they have and how can automation and process, regeneration make their experience better? So everybody's different. Everybody is on a different path in terms of maturity. So it's about sitting down and mapping out those pain points and how can we make it better. Right. And as a CPO, I'm also the chef, cook, and bottle washer sometimes, right? So I can help with suggestions and also help you with framing that new process and how it would work. So it's not just a technology play for us, right? It's more of a process play and a change management play than it is just rolling in technology.
Right. Now, you mentioned that you're working with and you've rolled out to large global organizations. Is that kind of the target market for Focal Point, or is there a certain level of maturity or a certain level of volume or anything that you'd recommend that a procurement organization has before Focal Point is appropriate for them? Or is it really appropriate no matter where you are in terms of maturity and size?
So we have some clients that are using the system just for project management. So they don't have spend analytics. They don't have a contract management tool. While we can offer those things, they just want the project management solution, which is fine, right? And you can do that when you have, say, 3 and 4, stakeholders or 3 or 4 folks on your procurement team. You just want to keep track of what they're doing in the benefits. That's one application of it. Then you go all the way to, the people that have 50 users globally, multiple currencies, multiple languages. So it kind of bans the spectrum, right? But it kind of goes without saying, if you actually have lots of spend and lots of contracts, you want to manage them somewhere, right? We provide far more value with a full integrated suite where you can have all these artifacts attached to your projects than if it just stands alone. But the standalone sourcing, the tracking solution works perfectly fine just on its own.
So my last question, and I always say that this is the easy question, is that if listeners have listened a little bit to what you've talked about Focal Point and the gap that you are addressing in the market, the opportunity that comes with leveraging a tool like Focal Point, where would be the best place for them to go to find out a little bit more or connect with you directly?
Right. So you can email me, Anders@focalpointprocurement.com. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can go to our website, focalpointprocurement.com. At the end of the day, I love procurement. I've been doing this for 25 years. I love waxing poetic with people and talking about this and that and the other thing, as you know. Just hit us up, and we'd love to talk to you guys.
Yeah. Well, I'm a big fan of what you're building. So I definitely encourage anybody who kind of resonates with the things and the challenges that you talked about to go and check it out. What I'll do is I'll put the links that you mentioned in the show notes for today's episode. So all of our episodes are going to be at artofprocurement.com/podcast. And you can just search in there for Anders or for Focal Point, and today's episode will come up. So thank you very much, Anders, for joining us today. Thanks for tuning in to this special Startup and Growth series. To listen to the entire series and for the show notes page that accompanies each episode, please go to artofprocurement.com/startup series. That's artofprocurement.com/startup